Welcome to episode 5 of Raise the Bar with me, your host, Daryl LeVar. In this episode, we're going to take a look at an instance where lots of people think you have to use late bound, where you can still use early bound and get some of the advantages of it as well. So in this example, I've created an interface called iAddressable. And really this kind of use case is, hey, I want to be able to get a display or a full string of what the actual address is, no matter what entity is that has that address. Okay, I like laying out my early bound entities like this, where I've got my entity class or entity DLL assembly here, and then my entity folder, and in here I've got all my entities, and then I created a folder called extensions. You can call it whatever you want, but these are extensions that I'm doing on top of the early bound classes that are getting generated. So in here I've created this iAddressable. Now you could split this off into different files, but just for simplicity reasons of putting it all in the same place, I've kept it in this single file, and it kind of makes sense in the sense that this iAddressable is really kind of a hack to tell C#, hey, I want to be able to do this one specific thing for all these different types. So let's walk through what this is. All this is it says iAddressable has these properties. So you can apply it to any entity that has these properties. If it doesn't have it, you can add them to the entity as well, but for simplicity's sakes, let's just go ahead and look at those entities that have those properties. And now the weird thing is, because you can't add any implementation to an interface, but you can add implementation to a static extension method that is applied to the interface. And so when you're looking at your IntelliSense, it looks like it's a part of the interface, and it applies to all classes which inherit that interface, which is really powerful. So all I've done is I created a public static class, addressable extensions. In here, I've gone through and added this getAddress method. And all it's doing is taking the first address line, adding the second address line and third address line, and this line here is just going through and it's putting a new line at the end of it if it needs to, if it's not empty. Oh, look at that. There's even a bug in it. That's really not what you want. So I'm always going to put a new line after address 1, and then I may or may not put a new line after address 2. So these are just a method to do conditionals of, hey, add that line to it if it's not empty. If it's empty, then or white space, then go ahead and give an empty string back, else give me a new line. So address 1, line 2, line 3, and then finally we have the city, state, and zip, and this is a US example, so feel free to bring in whatever your format of your address would be in your example as well. But so that's just the example of that. I'm going to go ahead and collapse that for now. So that's the actual method that's going to be applied to that extension. Then the only other work that you have to do is to go and actually declare that that class implements that interface. So here, account, contact, lead, business unit, competitor, site, and system user, all these entities by default out of box already have these properties on them. So all you got to do is add that partial class to the beginning of it, that partial keyword, and make sure it's in the same namespace. So I'm in the same namespace. Even though I'm in extensions, I'm in xyz.xrm.entities namespace here with all my other entities. And I've just gone through and added that interface to that. Normally, I usually create a new class for new file for each one of these things. That way I can look to see account, contact, lead, business unit, and competitor. But since we're not giving any other information to this, it kind of makes sense to keep this in this iAddressable. That way anything that's related to iAddressable is in this single file, and it's only 52 lines, so it isn't too big to grep. So not too bad. So let's go ahead and look at the example of how to use this. So if I create my new account here, I automatically get this getAddress function to it already. Let's do a new one here. Let's do address equals new lead. If I look at here, I have a getAddress. And now you can see that it is coming from the extension method here, and from that sign as well, it is coming from an extension method, but it does show up in IntelliSense, and it will go through and call that method for you. So in this case, this will go ahead and create a brand new entity instance and take the attribute collection that's in here and put it in there. Works just fine. So make sure that that you're trying to do that, and you're not trying to just cast the entity to that type, because that will compile just fine. And you can go ahead and do target2.getAddress, and it looks like it's there, but it's going to blow child runtime because this thing really isn't a lead. It's really an entity that's been cast as a lead. So just make sure that you are actually making sure that you've either called toEntity or you've done the actual creating the actual constructor. So that base type really is that base type and isn't an entity base type. So So that's about that. That's about it. So this sort of design interface you can apply to anything that you're doing that involves early binding, just because it's easy to go through and get the actual address information out doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it with early binding. So you could go through and do this the late bound approach, but then you don't have any early binding checking to make sure that you're not calling this on an attribute that you shouldn't be calling it on. This get address, you can call it on any attribute, even if it doesn't even support it. So I could do new case of it. I don't think case does. Oh, because the IntelliSense won't work because it's not compiling. But yeah, that would, because this is just typed as an entity, that doesn't prevent anything from being called that shouldn't be getting called. Where this, on the other hand, will enforce that only entities that you've actually declared to implement that interface will actually have that method showing and be showing up there. So it's kind of an interesting kind of hack or a neat way to go through and apply logic to multiple entities at once, as long as they have the same attributes. You just create whatever interface you want, declare whatever values on it that you need to. If one's missing an attribute, you can go ahead and add it if you want, and the actual entity is a different partial class. But it's just a simple way to be able to go through and get that additional intelligence, additional IntelliSense, additional type checking without having to resort back to late bound. So hopefully you learned something, and thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you like this new format of much shorter, much more precise to the point, and less me searching through code, let me know to go through and try to. I'd have 2 hours worth of video, try to get down to 20 minutes, and it just was taking way too long to edit and everything else. So hopefully this will be nicer for you and easier for me to do as well. I'll be able to get more videos out there and a easier clip and at a faster clip for you. So just feel free to leave comments. Feel free to contact me on Twitter as well at DD Labar. And thank you and have a great day.